This is a story of the anguish of Kern County families whose loved ones were brutally murdered 2 decades ago. The families want this story told, but to tell it, it is necessary to describe vicious sex assaults. These descriptions may be too intense for some viewers.
It's incredibly uncommon for that to happen.
It was surreal. She had a lot of defense wounds on her hands.
Someone is killing women in Bakersfield.
Her daughter will live with that image for the rest of her life.
I certainly don't want to alarm the public at this point.
We knew that she had been stabbed multiple times.
A rash of murders paralyzing the city.
It never goes away, ever.
It was so brutal.
This is really weird.
But I do believe they need to be informed,
It is unusual.
and especially women who may be out walking late at night.
She, too, was repeatedly stabbed to death.
This is a special edition of 17 News. Bakersfield's secret serial killer. Now, here's Olivia LaVoice.
Women vanishing from the streets of Bakersfield. To this day, these vicious homicides are unsolved. But are they related? Is one man responsible for killing these women? Evidence suggests after their deaths, their killer spent time with their bodies, posing them, positioning them. Maybe so he could admire his work, maybe so he could further abuse them. A serial killer hunting women in our city. Yet somehow it was largely kept from the public until now. For more than a year, we've been looking into these unsolved murders. We want to know, could one man be responsible for all of these killings?
It wasn't long before Christmas.
Christmas 1996 came and went.
I think she was coming from the store. She was gone too long, longer than normal.
44-year-old Marianne Perkins vanished.
It was on a rainy night.
A couple viewing a vacant home in East Bakersfield made a horrifying discovery in the backyard.
How they identified her was through her dentures.
Her body decomposing, she'd been beaten and stabbed numerous times. Her nude body tied in a blanket.
She was just such a beautiful person.
2 years later,
I don't know why this person did this to my mom.
I used to talk to her every single day, several times a day.
39-year-old Leslie Dawn Preston was found in a field on Madison Street. She was last seen alive 3 days prior. Her body was nude. The killer had posed her. She had been stabbed in her neck, chest, and face.
He stabbed her 19 times and left her there.
2 more years go by.
Yes, Mahalia Jackson walked in the next morning and found her mother dead on her bed.
Ruby Lee Merriweather, a single mother of 4, was nude, stabbed 18 times.
And sexually assaulted.
There was no forced entry to her home.
And it was clear that Ruby had tried to escape her attacker by crawling under the bed.
The detectives are out right now going door to door trying to locate any witnesses that might have seen her in the last couple days.
We had to take care of each other. From wherever she left off, we had to pick it up, and that's harsh.
6 months later, 11 days before Christmas.
On the morning of December 14th, they say a tractor repairman finds the body of 27-year-old Katrina Antoinette Pink near Ridgeview High School.
The 27-year-old's t-shirt was pulled up, her pants pulled down, with long, deep gashes across her neck. She was last seen 2 days before at the Tropicana Motel on Union Avenue. 1 month later, Billie Jean Bear was from a small town in Alaska. She'd had a tough life. She'd came to Bakersfield on a bus with $10 in her pocket just a few months before she was murdered. The 42-year-old was riddled with stab wounds to her neck. She is left with her pants and underwear pulled down. The murders of Katrina Pink and Billie Bear were clearly similar to investigators and 17 News reporters.
Both had previously been arrested for prostitution and were known to work the Baker Street and Union Avenue areas. And the most obvious similarity, the murderer used a knife. For now, police are not calling these murders the work of a serial killer. But until they're certain, they are asking you, especially if you're a woman, to use extra caution when going out at night.
But that was 2001, and despite that warning, 3 months later, another woman was murdered.
They found her laying on the sidewalk.
Blood soaked the concrete near the train tracks in East Bakersfield.
How long did she lay there and suffer?
29-year-old Patricia Bessie Martin was stabbed to death. Her shirt pulled up, her bra pulled down.
To somebody, she was insignificant. But I think to everyone here, she was extremely significant.
Patricia Martin.
Former Bakersfield Police Sergeant Bill Darby was a new patrol officer in the spring of 2001.
It would have been the first murder I'd seen to that extent, and the viciousness.
The gruesome murder scene stuck with him. 4 years later, Darby's mentor impaired the wisdom of a veteran cop.
He told me to keep an eye out for a series of murders that happened in the late 90s, early 2000s. He believed they were all connected based on their lifestyles and definitely the types of murders, the weaponology.
6 in all. Were they linked?
Whether it's told to the press or not, this would have been obvious that there was a serial killer.
Most murders are a result of sex, drugs, or money.
Now retired, Greg Laskowski analyzed thousands of Kern County crimes during his 30-year career.
If it's just a vicious killing of a prostitute, this ritualistic murder, then you may look at it, this person has an issue and may be doing this again and again, be a repeat offender.
A killer on the streets of Bakersfield.
It was very brutal. The victim was stabbed multiple times and sexually assaulted. And it was very obvious that she had been sexually assaulted.
Bakersfield secret serial killer. Bakersfield secret serial killer. Here's Olivia LaVoice.
Marianne Perkins, Leslie Dawn Preston, Ruby Lee Merriweather, Katrina Pink, Billy Bear, and Patricia Martin.
We have someone out there that is harming women in an extremely unordinary way.
Police quietly pieced together a theory that a serial killer had killed 6 women. But time moved on. The cases of all the victims grew cold until...
My street name was Gypsy Rose.
It was a few days after Thanksgiving 2007. Gypsy Rose was working Union Avenue.
He had paid me, and it was like Jekyll and Hyde. He became real aggressive, real rough. He pulled out a knife.
She'd been raped before, but she'd never experienced anything like this.
It was humiliating, it was dirty. If I had gotten any kind of feces on the seats of the car, he made me lick that up.
Even more horrifying than the violent sexual assault.
He had told me that there were women that he had killed behind dumpsters, in his basement, in his car. He told me that if I didn't be quiet, that I was going to end up like some of the other girls.
She says he held her for 6 hours.
What really honestly saved my life was that street cleaner that came around the corner.
Badly beaten and naked, she took the one chance to survive. A month later, Christmas Eve 2007, another prostitute got into a man's car. Suddenly he became violent. She begged to be let go, and after hours of assaulting her, he told her to get out of his car. March 19, 2008, a car pulled up to a woman working as a prostitute on Union Avenue. Once she was in the car, the man locked the doors and said, "You're mine now." Hours of brutal beatings and savage rape followed. The victim was sodomized and forced to eat her own feces. When she jumped from the vehicle and tried to run, the rapist hit her with his car.
He drove 5 blocks, swerving to shake her loose, and slammed on the brakes, causing her to fly into this ditch behind a clinic in downtown Bakersfield. The woman woke up naked and battered, but thanking God she was alive.
3 days later, yet another woman working as a prostitute got into a man's car off of Union Avenue, and as they began to engage in sexual activity, he stopped, looked at her, and said, "You know what I really want? I want to keep you." He choked her until she passed out. When she came to, the man shoved her out of the car, nude from the waist down. 4 prostitutes attacked while working Union Avenue between 2007 and 2008. They shared the same suspect description, a man who was brutal, vile, talked of killing other women in the past. They described his car and a tattoo of a tiger on his arm.
I didn't go in right away because I was so embarrassed.
2 days later, she summoned the courage to tell police about the rape and what her attacker said about keeping women in his cellar and killing them.
We didn't have very many of those women that would come forward to say that they were assaulted.
Crime scene technician Sherry Hill worked with one victim to create a composite sketch. The rapist, eluding capture, is now on detectives' radar. 2 days after the last assault, patrol officers on Union Avenue spotted a car with a cracked windshield. Looking closer, they realized the car matched the vehicle description of the serial rapist, even down to a wiper that was missing, matching one of the victim's stories. They pulled over the gold Mercury and found the man driving the car matched the suspect description from his physical features to tattoos and gold necklace. His name, Michael Charles Brown. Officers brought Brown in on a traffic violation, ready to question him about the 4 assaults.
He seemed intelligent, he seemed calm. We knew certain facts that were indisputable fact, and he chose to lie.
But all 4 rape victims positively identified Brown as their attacker. Ultimately, DNA recovered from 3 of the Union Avenue victims matched to Brown. As prosecutors were building their case against the suspected rapist, the 33-year-old's DNA was entered into the nationwide DNA database, CODIS, another match. 9 years after Ruby Merriweather's daughter ran out into the streets, screaming for her mother, finally a DNA match.
I could tell he's sick. I mean, who would even find that in their, take that in their mind to do someone like that?
Michael Brown's DNA was found in feces located on Ruby Merriweather's body. Brown was 25 years old when the murder occurred in 2000. Investigators to this day have no idea if the pair knew each other or how Brown got into her home. Brown denied everything. No explanation for why his DNA was at the Merriweather crime scene.
I thought that we would be able to finally close several cases.
Asked her how many more families it was. Said, I know it's more families.
All eyes are on Michael Charles Brown. Born into a big family in the small central Mississippi town of Grenada. With family in Bakersfield, he visited periodically. He even spent a year attending Highland High School. In the summer of 1996, Brown made the permanent move from Mississippi to Bakersfield after being discharged from the Army. None of Brown's friends or family wanted to talk to me about how Brown spent his time in Bakersfield.
My name's Olivia LaVoice. I'm a reporter from 17 News. I called you before. I'm doing a story on your son Michael, and I just want to...
How do you want to talk to you?
And
I'm through.
Okay, can I give you a letter?
At this point in the investigation, detectives have very little to go on. 2 things have been determined. There was no sign of forced entry, and the victim was last seen about 10 o'clock.
Homicide detective Bill Darby was reviewing the Ruby Merriweather case in his office.
Looking into that case, and I was looking at crime scene photos, a police service technician had walked in and just to shoot the breeze, and she says, "Oh, I took those pictures." Said, "We just came back, a DNA hit." And she said, "Kathleen's case, there's a DNA?" And I said, "No, this is Ruby Merriweather." It was almost like you could see it in her saying, "This is really weird. This looks just like the pictures I took of Kathleen Heise's."
Puzzled over 2 different crime scenes, the technician confused the July 1998 bloody murder of beloved elementary school principal Kathleen Heise with the pictures taken at the Ruby Merriweather homicide from 2 years later.
The similarities, I'll just say, were obvious. The similarities are incredibly obvious.
But Darby wasn't the first person to notice.
I had seen very many homicides at that point, but this was unique.
Single mother, 50-year-old Kathleen Heise was, by all accounts, a very unlikely target for murder.
Hey, sweetheart. I talked to Lonnie just a few minutes ago.
June 30th, 1998.
And today is Monday, and it's almost 7:30.
The voicemail to her daughter is the family's last contact with Kathleen.
Anyway, there you have it. Love you. Bye.
She was most likely dead within hours of making that call.
Her case almost never left my desk in my entire career. Between Ruby Merriweather and Kathleen Heise, both of the victims were stabbed multiple times.
There was no forced entry, and it didn't seem like the killer was in any hurry at either crime scene.
There were similarities in what was actually done to each victim.
The Merriweather murder, the Heisey murder.
They weren't identical, but they were similar.
Kathleen Heisey had no criminal history. She had come from a well-known Kern County family, and her case, unlike the others, received massive media attention. For the first time in years, the unsolved murders were linked and pushed to the forefront.
The theory started to arise that they were possibly related to Kathleen Heisey. The victimology, for lack of a better term, is just so far off that no, you wouldn't put those together. In hindsight's 20/20, you could go into certain aspects of both cases, which we have, and see a lot of things that we should have seen.
A rash of unsolved murders plagues Bakersfield. Have investigators caught their man, Bakersfield's secret serial killer? Bakersfield's secret serial killer. Here's Olivia LaVoice.
Memorial Day weekend 2001.
We were made aware of a case by one of the detectives of the case with Wendy Kyle.
There's nothing worse than losing a child, especially in this horrific way.
Firefighters responded to a house fire on Circle Drive in Oildale. Inside was the body of 24-year-old Wendy Kyle. Details of the crime scene match some of the others. She was found near the foot of the bed, partially nude, and stabbed numerous times before the fire was set.
And I feel like I've lost a part of me.
Happy birthday, dear Wendy.
She was born on my birthday. We celebrated our birthdays together.
Now, the man that murdered your sister.
This is Wendy's sister reaching out to a psychic on the Montel Williams talk show.
The place was on fire, and she lived in a small guest house.
Will they find this person?
Yes, they will. Absolutely, they will.
Tragically, Wendy died on her sister's birthday. There were several persons of interest in Wendy's murder. A man she had dated who'd made incriminating statements, and this man, sitting next to Wendy. He has never been identified. Despite several leads, the Wendy Kyle murder case went cold for years.
She wasn't what they made her out to be at all.
Witnesses contacted law enforcement and 17 News providing information, placing Michael Charles Brown and Wendy Kyle together at the downtown Bakersfield Mint Bar the night she was murdered. A friend of Wendy's, who we'll call Jane, has tried to help investigators from the start, providing key information about the case through the Secret Witness Program. Now, to protect the integrity of the Secret Witness Program, we've agreed to conceal her identity. She knew Wendy, and as it turns out, she also knew Michael Charles Brown.
Very nice, friendly, personable, well-spoken.
Hanging at the Mint Bar in the late 90s and early 2000s, they all ran in a similar social circle.
I trusted him. And he was charming and kind.
When she heard Brown had been arrested for viciously raping 4 women and killing Ruby Merriweather,
Wendy immediately kind of popped in my head.
A whole string of murders popped into the heads of detectives, and all eyes are on Michael Brown. But who was this man? He was in and out of jail dozens of times during the 22 years he's lived in Bakersfield. Now overlay that timeline with a calendar of the murders, and it's clear. Brown was free and in town at the time of every homicide. Brown was out of jail and living less than a mile from Marianne Perkins when she was killed in 1996. A week later, he was arrested for stealing a car. He was incarcerated for that until March 1998. 4 months after he got out, the bodies of Leslie Dawn Preston and Kathleen Heisey were found just 1 day apart. 2 years later, June 15, 2000, a woman walking down Chester was forced into a stranger's car. After he raped her, he drove off. 4 days later, Ruby Merriweather's body was discovered. Michael Charles Brown was arrested on July 10, 2000. From then on, he was in custody as the DA's office built their case against him. Until December 4th, prosecutors abruptly dismissed the case, and Brown was free to go. 10 days later, Katrina Pink was found murdered. Records also show in January of 2002, Brown and his brothers were arrested at a party after a man was stabbed to death. Investigators couldn't pinpoint which of the brothers committed the crime, so the Browns were released. After that, Brown was in and out of jail, mostly for DUIs. In March 2003, Brown was arrested for hitting a pedestrian, Gary White. As a result of the crash, White's body became lodged in the windshield of Brown's car.
Turned into the Der Wiener Schnitzel, and he and his brother had to remove the body from the windshield, and they left it behind.
Goldie White is the pedestrian's cousin.
What? To push a dead body or roll around with him in the windshield? That's crazy.
Brown was convicted of vehicular manslaughter and sentenced to prison. 4 years later, he was released. His last 2007 term ended in October. A month later, the prostitute rapes began. This is KGET's Murder Book, documenting every homicide in Kern County, the cause of death, the weapon used, the way the killer left the victim. For this investigation, I found each woman was murdered in Bakersfield, stabbed numerous times, left either completely or partially nude, most with their body displayed in a sexualized manner. All of these women fit a profile. No other homicide in Kern County has matched these same characteristics since the killing of Wendy Kyle in 2001, what looks to be a pattern left behind by a single killer.
Bakersfield's secret serial killer.
I personally believe that Michael Charles Brown killed all of those women and Kathleen.
After our 2016 investigation into the Kathleen Heisey case, we received numerous tips from viewers, but one call stood out. A woman said she lived just down the street from Kathleen Heisey. Remembering the day before her murder, something strange happened. A young black man offered to clean her carpets for free. She declined his carpet cleaning services. Moments later, she called a friend who lived a few houses down, only to find that the same man offered the neighbor free carpet cleaning, and she had accepted. So our caller went to her friend's house, and when she arrived, the man seemed startled. He told the two women he needed to get his equipment from his car. The man walked out and never returned. Both women were slightly rattled by the situation, but they didn't report the incident until they heard the very next day about the Kathleen Heisey murder.
It was like a commercial type van.
But remember Jane, the friend of Wendy Kyle and Michael Charles Brown?
He had been saying he was doing carpet cleaning.
Brown was tried for Ruby Merriweather's murder and the rapes of the four women.
It is the judgment and order of this court that you shall suffer the death penalty, said penalty to be inflicted within the walls of the state prison at San Quentin, California.
When it came time for him to plead for his own life to avoid the death penalty, Michael Charles Brown declined to fight it. The vicious killer displayed no emotion as he was sentenced. Much about Brown remains a mystery, like why he spent Christmas Eve prowling Union Avenue before picking up a prostitute he then assaulted, and the most violent attack he committed on a living victim took place on his birthday. The person we wish to speak with the most, the killer himself, who's never before spoken with a reporter. Brown and I wrote letters to each other as he sits on death row where no inmate has been executed in over 12 years. He wrote, "I'm dealing with a lot right now, so it's not the best time for our meeting. My story still has to be told, and I hope you will still be around when the time is right. For the sake of the family members and friends of all his victims who ask us to find answers to their heart-wrenching questions, we'll be waiting."
Definitely a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, if you ask me. If he did all this stuff and all these things, there is actually, two people inside of everyone. Because I never could see that on here at all. At all. At all.
If you have information that could help detectives solve any of these cold cases, contact the Bakersfield Police Department.
And welcome back. Jim Scott with Tammy Melchak and Olivia LaVoice here. Just before we go into our special edition of 17 News 11, a couple of questions for you. First of all, good work. Great work.
Yeah, very compelling. Wow.
For our viewers out there who just watched this special report, what do you really want them to take away from this report?
I want everyone to keep in mind that all of these homicides we discussed tonight, aside from the Ruby Merriweather case, all of those cases are still unsolved. That is 7 murders. All of the families of those women really still have no answers. Everything we discussed tonight is still just a theory, and that's not enough. These families really need concrete, definite answers in order to have closure.
Right, no matter how long it takes. And when you listen to all those interviews and your research, I mean, it seems pretty cut and dry that Mr. Brown is the killer in all these cases. What is the status of the investigation into those cases where he's not been charged?
Well, for the integrity of the unsolved cases, Bakersfield Police declined to be interviewed for this story. However, we do know that all of the cases are still open, the investigations are active, but I cannot stress enough the importance of people calling in with information, even if you think it's insignificant or irrelevant or potentially has already been reported before. Please still pick up the phone and call the police department. Our law enforcement, they're so incredibly busy. You can't rely on them to go ahead and periodically review these cold cases on their own, because the reality is they just don't have time.
They have a lot of other cold cases.
Yes, well, and new cases as well.
Right.
But if you call and give them information, they will follow up on it. I can attest to that. They did that several times throughout my research for this story. We passed on tips. They followed up on it immediately. They interviewed people for the first time in over 20 years. So please, please call if you have any information whatsoever.
And speaking of the law enforcement officers you interviewed for your special report, these are very dedicated people. And they're retired though, right?
Yes, yes, they are.
And they're
yes.
still.
Bill Darby and Sherry Hill, they have been amazing. It's been incredible to work with them. You know, they have never given up on these cases. And there were so many setbacks with this story, but no matter what, I knew that I couldn't quit, because Bill Darby and Sherry Hill, they never did that. And I really feel that that is the attitude the community needs to adopt when it comes to these unsolved cases.
Yeah, I know you have a real passion for helping the victims and the victims' families. Yeah. And I know also on Facebook that you periodically are posting cold cases too, where folks can go there.
Yes, I just think it's so important to just remind people that these cases are still unsolved. A lot of times I'll post about a story and viewers will comment and say, I had no idea this case is still open. So just that reminder, you know, we just need to keep these cases alive until they're solved.
Yeah, and help those families, like you said, get some closure. Even
Absolutely.
if it's been 20 years, they still need that closure.
Absolutely. Time does not heal those wounds. If anything, I think it could make it worse in some ways, because they feel that their loved ones are forgotten, and you know, we don't want anyone to feel like that.
No.
Well, we hope that this report triggers some memories in some people, and perhaps new information will come forward out of this. Olivia, once again, great work.
Great work.
Thank you.
All right.